All right. Hi, everyone. This is great to all be here together. And James, is this a good position to be in for
One
the
step back.
one step back? Okay.
There's your camera right
Yeah.
there.
Hi, everyone online. Thank you for being here too. So this is such a pleasure to introduce Peter, and to do so, I need my glasses. So let me just grab those. Thank you, James, for making this possible. And thank you, Peter, for your book. So we are here to hear poems from New York Trilogy. I want to go back in time before this book just to say a few words about Peter's early work. Peter Balakian was one of the first poets I ever read. I remember my mother's copies of his first two books, Father Fisheye and Sad Days of Light. Their titles drew me to them, and what I found inside shocked me. Those books were like mirrors. There is much discussion now of the importance of being able to recognize ourselves in literature, but it wasn't always the case. Father Fisheye and Sad Days of Light were some of the first books I identified with as an Armenian American, as a kid from New Jersey, and as the grandchild of a genocide survivor. Peter's books were a revelation. Since those early books, Peter has gone on to publish 7 more books of poetry, as well as the award-winning memoir Black Dog of Fate, the New York Times bestselling narrative history The Burning Tigris, and several collaborative translations from the Armenian. He is a public intellectual and a professor at Colgate University. In 2016, he received the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry for Ozone Journal. New York Trilogy brings together 3 long multi-sequence poems from his 3 previous poetry collections, Ziggurat, Ozone Journal, and No Sign. The long poem is a form Peter has been working on for 20 years, and New York Trilogy is the culmination of this project. This poem's center is New York City from the 1960s to the early 21st century, and from this center, the poem opens out into other continents and eras, even other epochs. These shifts in time and space capture not only the disjuncture of the present, but also how the past is uncontained in the poet's personal sense of history. New York Trilogy comes out of an American long poem poetics defined by Whitman, Crane, Williams, to name a few, but it is also the end result of the long development in his own style of what Peter has called writing horizontal, conceiving of the poem as a space capable of holding discordant perspectives, intimate feeling, and irresolvable experiences in one place and ultimately in conversation. In New York Trilogy, each of the sections, Ziggurat, Ozone Journal, and No Sign, contain sequences that are in conversation with each other and with sequences in other sections. The book-length poem is like a stratigraphic record of the human heart overlaid by history. Here are the poet's fondnesses for jazz, movies, books, his devotions for his daughter, friends, lover, the upheavals of his time, wars, epidemics, acts of mass violence. And nothing can be contained. All events have more distant origins, all successions, successive upheavals. Everything repeats and rhymes. In order to write about 9/11, Peter begins with the excavation of the Ziggurat, the world's first skyscraper, so to speak, from the civilization of Ur in present-day Iraq. In Ozone Journal, it's an archaeological dig in the Syrian desert with a TV crew in the present day that connects to the Armenian genocide in 1915. In No Sign, we must go back to Pan meeting Gaia before we can arrive at the Paradise, California fire. And Gaia and Pan connect to Vietnam, which connects to the US war in Iraq, and the dating of rock, the material, connects to the dating of bone, and the Jersey cliffs speak to Manhattan, and these conversations, which sound outlandish here in my retelling, are revelatory because they make sense happen. Before the trilogy ends in what may be a stay from or may actually be the atomic blast, the diction is pure New York Trilogy, a geological, archaeological, cultural, emotional collision that in a single stanza captures the tenor of the long poem perfectly. quote, he, I know beneath this hull is rift and subduction, underwater jazz and terror, as if Sun Ra and Chopin embraced beneath a surface they didn't understand. She, remember, light spills as dark comes, chalk floats off the silhouettes. It's that embrace, unquote. It's that embrace of Sun Ra and Chopin that stays in my head and makes me think that despite it all, New York Trilogy just might be a love poem. Please join me in welcoming Peter.
Susan, thank you. That's a beautiful meditation. I almost feel like I could just sneak out the back now. It actually does liberate me from having to explain some things, but I will explain a few things.
Peter, would you mind taking a step back?
Yeah,
On Zoom?
sure, the Zoom,
That's
sure.
perfect.
I think
Thank you.
I think it's James. Thank you for all you've done setting up today's event. It is it's really great pleasure to be in this store. I have done other Grolier readings and I've always been off-site. So like being here, my God, this is really an intense kind of energy. And I do want to reflect just a tad on the Grolier. I mean, you're all Grolier fans. You don't need me to tell you how important this store is and what a shrine it is, really, for poetry. I recall my first visits here circa 1976, 77, and I certainly met Louisa then. And all of you, and probably everybody here, most everybody here knew Louisa Solano. I didn't know her as a close friend, just as a wonderful spirit and protector of poetry. And I didn't even know that she actually turned the store to pure poetry. I had assumed it was, because I think around the time I started hanging out here, it was just about pure poetry. So Louisa is really, it's wonderful that you have a reading in her honor. She was a great keeper of this house. And then, of course, the house got passed to Ifene and Tiki, and what a wonderful spirit and person and writer and mind he was. And I did a reading with him and a few others around commemorating Armenian writers killed in the Armenian Genocide, and that would have been in the fall of 2015, and that was at Cambridge High School, actually. So anyway, just to express great gratitude to those who've kept this house, and I look forward to reading here and then talking with you. I want to look. This is too cozy to be wearing a sport coat, isn't it? I've been making a public statement at my readings this year, and I want to keep doing that. So let me read what I've been saying. As an American writer and university professor of 45 years, I feel it's my obligation to witness what's happening to our democracy. I believe this is well beyond party identities and party politics. Donald Trump's assaults on universities and higher education, on secondary education, on civic culture, including museums, through coercion and tactics that resemble extortion, are anti-democratic and often violations of the First Amendment, and they will not work. Critical thinking and knowledge production in our democratic educational structure is a sedimentary rock with layers embedded in several hundred years of culture and intellectual life. Without that culture and our open pluralistic systems of learning, we wouldn't have a democracy. To falsify history, as this president and his followers are doing, is also to undermine the foundations of fact, knowledge, and moral understanding and our future. I'm reminded that Nazism, although violently destructive, was not able to destroy the Enlightenment tradition in Germany. And you know, it also, I mean, makes us all realize that this store is culture. This store is part of the sedimentary rock of critical thinking, knowledge, imagination, and language. So, I mean, really, you know, the connections are deep and the gratitude is much. Now, Susan, I really am grateful for your beautiful reflection. So I'm going to say less than I was going to say. I was going to note that, yeah, for me, this is a book in a certain kind of American long poem tradition. Whitman Williams, Hart Crane, and others, many others, the long poem. I always tell my students, Whitman's free verse, out of which came the American long poem, it is an American creation. It is an original. Not, that belongs alongside the suspension bridge, the skyscraper, baseball, jazz, the cheeseburger. I mean, you can keep adding to it, but I do think the long poem and free verse are pieces of American invention that we need to keep reminding others of. I was going to say, the thing I want to just underscore before I read a few sections from the three books, yeah, it's the sequencing idea that for me is kind of at the heart of the form of the poem. So that in each of the three books, there are four threads. So, for example, I have to read them myself because I can't remember them. For example, in book one, Leonard Woolley excavating the ziggurat at Ur, about which the persona is reading. He's reading that. And I use the word persona because, as we all know, poems come out of well springs of personal experience, but they are not literal autobiography. There's a lot of invention, there's a lot of exfoliation. So I'm more comfortable with persona than the I. So Leonard Woolley excavating the ziggurat, or the building of the World Trade Towers, the breakup of a relationship, and a TV journalist injured in the Iraq War. Those are the four threads in book one, A Train Ziggurat Elegy. In book two, Ozone Journal, there's the forensic expedition with a TV crew to find skeletal remains of Armenians from the genocide in the eastern Syrian desert. There's a slice of jazz history via the career of the legendary record producer George Avakian, who is named Jerry in the book, a cousin dying of AIDS, and the breakup of a marriage. In book three, No Sign, the narratives are a conversation between a long estranged couple and their memory of their past, the film Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is embedded in the couple's conversation, the climate change crisis, and trickles of the aftermath of the Vietnam War. I would note two of the two autobiographical contexts. I had a summer job in the late 1960s as a mail runner and a stock boy in Lower Manhattan. I worked for a stevedore company, and I had to get checks into the bank these were large numbers, and the interest you lost if you didn't get a check in the bank before 3 p.m. was significant enough. So they hired somebody like me to do this. Anyway, I was watching the World Trade Towers being built, and it was very exciting then. And then when they came down, I found myself obsessed with those years of watching the towers go up. And I actually delivered mail to the first tower when it was about 60 floors complete, sometime in the early winter of maybe 1970. I'm not sure the exact year. But the other really rich autobiographical context is that I did go. The 60 Minutes crew with the late great Bob Simon took me to the Deir Zor Desert, and we did a segment on the Armenian genocide, and that aired on 60 Minutes around 2010, early 2010. But there I was with that group in the Syrian desert in the hot sun of late spring of 2009. So that stuff's going to get into these threads. The idea, of course, is that the threads keep catching on each other, and then they twine, and the four threads speak to each other in each book, and then I hope each book speaks to the other books. So let me read just, I think the opening sections of each book, just give you a sense of how the thing moves. And then I'm happy to have as much conversation as any of you, want. So let me, so I'm going to open here in the A Train Ziggurat Elegy book, number 1. I think I'll read the first 4 sections, okay? The tender head of the he-goat on the cover stares through the branches of a golden tree, and I'm just moving on a system of fuses while the fruit stands of Spanish Harlem fly above. And even now, remembering when we were here after Nixon waved goodbye and rose in the chopper. Even now, seeing it through the double glass as Ur of the Chaldees, revised and updated Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations at Ur, flares on the yellow cover in the momentary dark that wrapped our bodies up all night like violent paint on the sheets, like the broken fire escape of our building. At 125th, the guy next to me reading Another Country. The white guy passed out in a suit and a brown bag. The steel screeches the tracks and the vaults light up. A lot of things said on subways in this book. 2. To Woolley, the crash in Wall Street were a fata morgana of palms shattered in ice. He paid baksheesh to the locals and they kept digging baked clay and gypsum. Woolley loved cow dung, mud plaster huts, the world from bottom up. Quote, we found a clay figurine of a pig. Spindle whorls of baked clay proved a thread was spun here. Close quote. In the last days of Babylon, a mathematician gave 0 a name, not far from where Woolley dug. No great thing comes without a curse, said Sophocles. So 0 equals hollow circle equals cylinder seal, quote, skulls and seeds and all good things around. Nabokov. 3. You made his lines, which were opaque as ashes, seem clear as our confusion. Quote, the diagonal blacks a broken body. It was after the show. We walked from Tung Lai Shun to the Bowery, to the bridge and back. I like bridges, Franz Klein said. If people want to see bridges in my lines, that's good. And when we fell into the shadow of the morning, why did we stop talking after all of it, after everything. You disappeared on the train reading Merleau-Ponty. I got lost in Queens on the E. 4. I ran mail a whole summer down Greenwich and West. Before it even started, before we roamed Radio Row for 78s of Ellington and the Blanton Trio, before the yin-yang of real estate, under the Kensett skies over the river, the wrecking balls took Radio Row down. Florists, groceries, record shops, restaurants, the whole mid-century slid into a pit, and the sun-made Gothic trees of the falling windows. Out of res ipsa loquitur, out of Port Authority and Chase, Rockefeller and Tobin, the Twin Towers rose from the garbage. I'll go to the next book, Ozone Journal. All right, so I'm going to read the first 8 sections of the Ozone. So that's book 2. And here we have the expedition into the Syrian desert thread and other threads that you will see. 1. I woke to CFCs humming out of coils. I woke to a compressor in my head, and the compressor in the wall that made cool air come out of the vents. Couldn't sleep. Downloaded photos of the day to stare at them, as if the sky were something I could breathe in. Not good times by the sea, but desert blue and cracked ground. Some tumbleweed blowing into my jeans. Green signs of Arabic letters looked like beautiful tributaries as they faded out along a road going to the Iraqi border, where oil refineries were firing on the horizon, where a border is a road ending and beginning. 2. All day I was digging Armenian bones out of the Syrian desert, with a TV crew that kept ducking the Mukabarat, who trailed us in jeeps at night and joined us for arak and grilled goat under colored pennants and cracked lights, in cafes where piles of herbs glistened back at me. I passed out from sun and arak and camel jokes in a massive hotel. My room opened to the Euphrates that was churning in the moonlight. 3. When I woke, I was dreaming back to the 80s on Riverside Drive, where Ani was born on a bright spring day, in a decade of money and velvet, when the plastic voice of Sinatra floated through fern bars, where we lounged with wine spritzers and lemon drop martinis. It was silver palette and more than cuisine, with its encoded sense of ending, and the smoked sable at Barney Greengrass, where we took Ani for brunch on Sunday when the morning was lit up and open. 4. Dreaming back to days. Why here, on the black Euphrates at 4 a.m.? After our life went up in a blue flame as the gas jet died, and we were gone to each other. The walls silent and the floorboards echoed. The U-Haul came and my books got rained on, and the flags were rippling for San Gennaro. Thisbe and Pyramus disappeared as myth and symbol, and that summed it up. 5. Those days, no dream. The squeaky cassette going on Jerry in Riverdale. When I arrived, the sky was graphed through phone wires and Amtrak cables. I was sitting beneath shelves of uncut masters, the 78s of 1940 when Jerry cut the modern LP and found the lost hot jazz of the 20s. I was staring at hanging Armenian rugs and the river glare on a photo of Miles Davis, almost liquid in the sepia emulsion of 1947, when the smoke spiraled into Three Deuces on 52nd at a table with Sterling Brown and Gillespie and Jerry. And he put it in his hammered speech, quote, John Hammond was so hated by the musicians, Miles cut him out of the photo and pasted Dizzy in. But that was before I got Miles interested in John Cage. 6. By noon, I was leaning on the cotton white hospital wall, gazing at the islands of purple lesions on David's slightly swollen leg, the edema rising in his groin, the sheets strewn and the IV dripping blue down the snaking plastic tube. My year of magical thinking looped down the drain of my brain. Take care, cousin. I blew him a kiss. 7. Before I was back at the English department table, feeling the post-mortem of the modern, the paradigm critique essential, but the artifact thrown out with the bathwater, over-fetishizing indeterminacy or depressed expression of late capitalism. Get Foucault and Trilling in bed, give peace a chance. Gorky said, take a flat brush and work it till there are 2 hairs left. Yeah, the career of my late great friend George Avakian, I did 12 hours of video interviews with George Avakian, the great jazz and blues producer at Columbia Records in the 1940s and 50s. George began producing jazz out of his Yale dorm room at the request of the president of Decca Records in the late 30s, and then he went over to Columbia. But so George's story, it's a rich one, and he's responsible for so much of what happened to Miles Davis in the 50s. Anyway, I don't want to go on about it, but I just want to make a little more of a context for the joy of those 12 hours of video interviews and the great career of that producer who lived into his late 90s. Okay, let me close with the opening sections from the third book, No Sign. In this book, I've been interested more and more for a while in the intersection between theater and poetry and the dialogical voice that can move between the lyric voice and the dramatic voice. In this poem, the he-she dialogue dominates, and then these 4 threads move through. So 1, he, is it night already? She, no. He, did our house fall down? She, what happened? He, is it you? 2, he, yes. She, why should I believe you? He, doesn't geology put us in our place? He, we appeared in the age of fission, vaporized bodies, ionized dragonflies, shadows printed on stone. She, Japanese cities burned in my dreams. I saw the newsreels in class decades later. He, we're back here on the Palisades cliffs, staring at Manhattan. Remember when the Sauterne was liquid gold? 3. She, in the beginning there were alpha particles and gamma rays. We always see daylight through the kitchen window near dusk. We can't forget how dusk turns the hydrangea deep blue. We can't forget the glowing dioxin sun, the no-gaze morning bright blue Agent Orange sky, even now, after all. 4. He, Godard called Hiroshima Mon Amour Faulkner plus Stravinsky. She, remember? The Angelica, September smell of light rain, warm sidewalks, shop awnings, late summer. He, the Noren curtains opened, the Noren curtains closed. We stared at kanji, birds, sketches of roofs, a tree. The lovers walked through the curtains either way. Time shifted like breeze through eye sockets. She, they said goodbye and the Noren curtains opened. And the past was a burning city seen in silence, just images on screens. And here the two from the movie begin to speak, and they have their own voices, Louis and Elle. Louis, what did Hiroshima mean to you? Elle, the end of the war, fear and terror that it could happen to us. Then indifference, astonishment that they dared do it. Then it became an unknown fear. 5. She, we're standing on an underground channel of molten rock that fed volcanic eruptions 200 million years ago. Earth equals axis equals spinning equals two selves. Swerve, possibility. He, take Pan. All day we've played around with him. She, here we are lying on Gaia. He, top of a volcano, molten, basalt, cooled and hardened. We're on the sill, still. Rock is never still. She, the sill's eastern edge equals Palisade cliffs, one version of home. So why don't I stop here and open it up for any conversation. Martha.
At what point did you realize this was going to be put together as a trilogy? And did that influence the way you wrote the later ones?
I think when I finished the first long poem, A Train Cigarette Elegy, much of which, or a good piece of which, appeared in Agni. So I'm always so grateful to that great magazine. I think when I finished that first book, Martha, I felt, yeah, I'm this is going. This keeps going. I started the second book, Ozone Journal, and so it really happened within the first few years of the work on it. And there was always a sense for me that these were in sequence. So I'm grateful that, I get to put them all together now under one cover. Jane.
In what way has your love of jazz influenced how you write poetry? Or has it? I mean, I shouldn't presume.
Complicated question. I wouldn't want to claim to be, a jazz poet. I'm not.
No,
But like all of us who are writers, artists of any kind, we're all constantly absorbing great energies from other arts. And for me, like visual arts are a very big part of my imaginative life, and my language gets all tied up with painting, sculpture, drawing, all of it. So, jazz becomes an informing part of the imagination. I think that's probably, where I'd put it. I don't want to make any claims to. I mean, I know there are poets who really say, my rhythmic structures are coming out of jazz. I don't feel that kind of connect. But great nourishment from all kinds of music that feed your own complex kind of weird web, the weird web of it in the head and the body,
New York jazz?
and the body too. Because music's so bodily. All the arts are bodily. What were you asking me
Well, I
about?
was just saying, like New York and jazz, are they really kind of together in your mind?
Yeah, they are, and especially George Avakian is an old family friend. So I can remember as a kid when my dad and I would be having conversations about contemporary music or pop music, and we'd get into some disagreement about something. And my father would say, "Well, let's call George. He's got the answer. Whatever George says is correct." So George Avakian was really an amazing person, and you know, what- the stories are extraordinary. He as a college junior, the president of Columbia Records says, "Look, go down into our vaults." And I don't know, we just do classical music, he's telling this college kid. We do classical music. I don't know anything about jazz. And now you want to produce a jazz album? Go down in the vaults and see what you find. And George found all these uncut masters of Armstrong's two bands, the Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens. Yeah, exciting stuff. So that gets my juices going as a writer. Maybe not about jazz, but just as a writer.
Thank you.
Me.
Peter, did you argue with your father about rock and roll then?
We had some interesting conversations about Bob Dylan. My dad was not a rock and roll listener, but my obsession with Dylan as a teenager was almost to the point of having me like exiled from the house. But we would get into some interesting conversations about influences on Dylan, blues, and country, and black and gospel, and so on. And it was interesting how much my father understood, more than I did really in some ways. But I came to understand that later. But that's all. They were more intellectual conversations. And our dads were friends, Dean's dad and my, so it's great to have Dean here. We played high school football together back then. Let's go.
Yeah, Peter, so in listing Great American Love poems, I don't recall whether you mentioned the cantos, but they're in the sort of personal mythologies that this poem works off of. It reminded me of the kind of singular elusiveness of a Pound with his sort of particular passions from the troubadours, Guido Cavalcanti to Malatesta, and kind of economics and stuff. You've got your own sort of list of particular obsessions and foci. And so that's just one thought. I was wondering to what degree Pound has been in any kind of presence for you in thinking thinking about the complexity of the long poem structure, he called an epic a poem that includes history.
Right.
And then the other question I had for you was about, you know, you said that you were interested in the kind of dialogic nature of theater. And I was remembering Walcott and how obsessed he was with trying to get poets to write plays. But as I was listening to, again, you know, to a poem I know well, and the kind of exchange between husband and wife, the he and the she, you know, there's more like Godot there. That at the same time, it felt as though there is a kind of undercurrent of personality and presence to those two voices, which speak so gnomically and minimally. So just some kind of observations.
Well, thanks, Osgold. I mean, first, you know, Pound's a kind of a general atmosphere when you're dealing with a long form and sequences, because you know he and Eliot come along, you know, at a similar time in the 20th century that they begin to, even though they were kind of in denial about Whitman, they're really playing off Whitman, because Song of Myself is the beginning of the form. You know, before Whitman, of course, you have the tradition of long narrative poems goes back to the beginning of literature, right? But so Whitman starts the fragmented, decentralized lyric poem, long poem. You know, Pound and Eliot are engineering the modernist chapter of that, and you know, along with Eliot and Crane, and you know those modernist masters. I mean, you can't escape them if you're interested in the form and trying to do something with it. As for the dialogical, you know, as for the dramaturgical voices, it's the spareness of it that's appealing. Almost the, you know, whatever word you use, austere or minimalist. It's a good intersect with what we do in the lyric form as poets. So I got interested in trying to bring them together. It's the first time I've tried that kind of thing. Any plays I tried to write decades ago, I've long gone into the trash, but that's probably for the best. Yeah.
Peter, you're known as and so often function as a poet of witness, witness of 9/11, of Armenian genocide, and it's interesting to see in these first two in the trilogy, the I is the witness, witnessing stories personal and historical, you know, and political. In the third, when you break into those two voices, do you feel that allows you to sort of split the witness? I mean, do you sense a relationship between that splitting and your usual witness approach, or is it just you've moved into a different thing in the third and you would not think of it as?
No, I do think that the two voices in the third book have witness memory in a kind of dovetailing way. The Vietnam War fragments come down into this poem, and the Hiroshima event, you know, not that I would ever feel comfortable trying to go near that event unless I had something so mediating like the film. Yeah, that amazing film. You know, most of you probably know it. Renee and I'm blanking on the screenwriter and novelist who collaborated.
Marguerite Duras.
Yeah, Marguerite Duras. Yes. So yeah, so those witness elements absolutely trickle through. Yeah, I mean, if that's a useful word, and it's also, you know, memory history, the traumatic histories in memory interests me, even if I you know, whatever distance we might have from them, those events still exist. through the fractured lenses of memory and of other media, like a film. Is this a good moment? We can break here, you tell me. I'm grateful for your coming out and in this shrine, and we can chat more as we mingle. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's give Peter another round of applause for a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let's give Susan a round of applause for the wonderful introduction. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to everyone on Zoom. We have some books for sale. Peter will be signing books. If you would all please put your chairs up against one of the walls, I'll be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Susan, thanks, everyone.
No, it's the same Zoom mic.
It's so great to do this.
Is anyone